Welcome to my channel. This is one for Azazel. Just doing a review of this book the witnesses are studying, and I was just flicking through it and I noticed something, and this really confirms to me that this publication is poison, absolute poison. Some of you watching this might think, well, that's a bit extreme. How can you say such a thing? Well, I'll show you what I mean. This is page 25 of the publication that we're looking at. I was just looking at this page. It's lesson 2a, Understanding Ezekiel's Prophecies. Now let's have a look at this paragraph and let's see what's wrong with this paragraph. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this and ever wondered why the Watchtower teachings seem off at times, but you just can't put your finger on why, this might answer the question for you. It says, in the past, we have viewed a number of elements in Ezekiel's prophecies as the basis for a type-antitype fulfillment. This publication, however, refrains from describing any person, object, place, or event as a prophetic type that has a modern antitype, unless there is a clear basis in Scripture for doing so. Rather, it will point to the greater fulfillment of many of Ezekiel's prophecies. It will also examine the lessons we can learn from Ezekiel's message, as well as from the people, places, and events mentioned by him. Now, do you see the problem here? Because if you look at the definition of a type and antitype fulfillment, an antitypical fulfillment is a higher or greater fulfillment. And yet they say that they're not looking for that. But then they say rather it will point to the greater fulfillment. So Watchtower are just playing word games at this point and insulting the intelligence of people who are going to study this book. Because if they're looking for greater fulfillments of Ezekiel's prophecies, they are looking for antitypes. It's as simple as that. So on one side of their mouth, they say that they don't look for antitypical fulfillments anymore, and on the other side, they say, well, they do. And it's interesting because on page 154, so many times in this book they say that there's no antitypical fulfillment, but there's a lesson. And they go through, but then they get to this point here, what Ezekiel's vision teaches us today. So they're looking for a lesson. And they say that Ezekiel's temple vision applies to us today. And they say yes. So what they do, they say that Ezekiel's vision is very similar in one feature where it talks about a high mountain, and they link it with Isaiah's prophecy in Isaiah 2 verse 2 to 4 about Jehovah's worship being established above the top of the mountains. And it mentions the final part of the days in Isaiah chapter 2. So because of that, Jehovah's Witnesses say that it applies in the last days, which they believe we're living in today. It says, these prophecies apply to the time in the last days ever since 1919. And it's for this reason that they say Ezekiel's prophecies have greater fulfillment today. It applies today. But this is circular reasoning because, and they also break their own rule because how do they get to the point and say that we're living in the last days today? Well, isn't that the prophecy in Daniel chapter 4 with the tree that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of, and it would be cut down and 7 times would pass over it. And this was fulfilled on Nebuchadnezzar when he lost his sanity for 7 years, or 7 periods of time, and then was restored to his kingship. So that was the type, and the antitype is the 2,520 years from when Zedekiah was dethroned and the Davidic line of kings ceased until Jesus came in 1914, 2,520 years later, or 7 times 360 years. So here, Watchtower use an antitypical application of Daniel chapter 4 to say that 1914 was the beginning of the last days. Then they use Isaiah, which uses a similar expression, the final part of the days, and use something that's similar in there to this prophecy in Ezekiel to say that Ezekiel has a greater fulfillment. So Watchtower are breaking all the rules, including their own, in this circular reasoning. So it's a bit like this. If you can see that, these are just some rough notes. Pure Worship, this is the book we're looking at. Watchtower in recent years or decades no longer looks for prophetic antitypes. And they say that in the publication until they get to this page in 154 we've just discussed, and where they say Ezekiel applies today because Isaiah 2:2-4 applies in the final part of the days. And that's because the last days is based on 1919 and 1914, which are important dates to Jehovah's Witnesses. And those dates are legitimate dates because 1914 is based on the prophetic antitype of Daniel chapter 4, the tree dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. But the prophetic antitype doesn't apply because Watchtower in recent years no longer looks for prophetic antitypes. And around you go. When I was a Jehovah's Witness, sometimes I would wonder why I was so confused when I tried to read the publications, but I just couldn't quite put my finger on what the problem was. But now that I've been out for a few years, it's very clear to see. When you look at their publications, they're playing with your mind and you're just going around and around. It's another table which reiterates this point, which they seem to stress all through this book and yet do the exact opposite. Page 174, is Christendom the antitypical Jerusalem? So in the past, our literature has referred to Christendom as the antitype of apostate Jerusalem. The conditions in unfaithful Jerusalem, including idolatry and widespread corruption, certainly remind us of what is happening in Christendom and the Watchtower. However, in recent years, our publications, including the one you are now reading, have not taken the type-antitype approach to prophecy, except where the Bible provides a clear basis for doing so. Is there a solid scriptural basis for referring to Christendom as the antitypical Jerusalem? No. See, so Watchtower now saying they don't take the type-antitype approach. So let's have a look just briefly and see if there is a clear basis for applying an antitypical application of Daniel 4. We'll just have a quick look. Okay, so I won't read the whole chapter, but Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and Daniel interprets the dream. And it clearly says in chapter 4, verse 28, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. He starts bragging, and then a voice from heaven says, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it's being spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you'll eat grass, etc., etc. Note what verse 33 says. It says, immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar, and then he was restored. And there is no indication in this section of Scripture that there is an antitypical fulfillment anywhere. But there is a definite indication in writing here that this was fulfilled on Nebuchadnezzar. So again, where is the basis for 1914? It's based on a prophetic antitype which there is no clear indication of in the Bible. Because Watchtower no longer looks for antitypes. But the Old Testament prophecies and all the other ones that haven't been fulfilled, well, they apply today because we're in the last days. And we're in the last days because the last days began in 1914. And 1914 is based on the prophetic antitype of Daniel chapter 4. But this prophetic antitype doesn't apply because Watchtower no longer looks for prophetic antitypes. So that's just something I've seen as another example of the stupidity of Watchtower teachings and how they shoot themselves in the foot and insult the intelligence of millions of people worldwide who get involved with this stupid cult. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. This is one for Azazel.